All right, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 4 of Justice Speaks. And tonight we are ongoing, keeping the conversation going as the beat continues to go in regards to state and regional conferences, or regional and state conferences, however you want to word it. And so we're going to be talking about this topic. It has been, ever since the sermon came out, it has been everywhere. It's on everyone's lips, and everyone has a different opinion in regards to the whole matter. And so the whole issue is unifying the conferences, just the conferences, not the unions, but we want to unify the conferences. And we at Justice Speaks, we just want to sound off on this issue. We want to talk about it and come to a clear and precise point in regards to how we feel and where we stand in regards to this topic. And so we have our usual suspects that are joining us this evening. We have Pastor Corey Johnson, who's in Berrien Springs, Michigan, and Andrews University Seminary. We have Chaplain Michael Polite, who is the chaplain at Andrews University. And we have Pastor Rebecca Davis from the Atlanta Berean SDA Church. So we're glad to have all of you. Our other panelists will be joining us later on in the show. And so we thank God for them. And so before we start, we're going to start with a word of prayer. And so I ask you please bow your heads and close your eyes with me. Father God, we thank you for your blessings, your grace and mercy. And we want to pray for the viewers that are watching us tonight. And for those that will be watching it later, may they be inspired by what they hear tonight. Touch our lips with a hot coal from your altar. We just want to be led by you, Jesus Christ, but speak honestly and speak truth to power. And so we thank you for all these things. And this we say in your name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. All right. So what's up, man? What is this whole thing about state and regional conferences, about unifying? Like, what's the big deal? Why does it cause so much discussion around the conferences and, basically church members?
I think some of it is because they call it meta-modern generation. I think there's a pushback from making any distinctions that lead to oppression. So a lot of the up-and-coming generation believes that because we identify one as different, that is the baseline essence of all oppressive activity. That if we stopped noticing the differences in other people, then somehow it would create harmony, and we'd come together and we'd be a peaceful world where everything is cool. So I think this topic is being resurrected. It comes up, like every 20 years it seems, but it's being resurrected by a generation that is really starting to feel like maybe the distinctions we make is what leads to people being unequally treated, unjustly dealt with, etc.
Got it. Anybody else? What's the purpose? What's the big deal?
I would say that also that I think that there's a misunderstanding of what unity is, and believing that all must be done the same way under the same guise doing the same thing in order for there to be unity. And I think that there's some misunderstandings of how having regional and state conferences, how that may compromise unity in our church. So many people feel that our church is not unified as God wants us to be because we have different leaderships or different demographics that we are reaching based upon cultural differences or ethnic differences. So I think that there's an understanding of what unity means, or if that comes to opposition with what people view to be unity.
Okay, got it. Rebecca, you want to say something? So I'm about to jump into another question.
Nope, I agree with both of them. Go ahead and jump to the next question.
Okay, so we're saying, what we're saying is that we're going to unify the conferences just so that we can look like, or so that we can come together. So I guess my question is this generation a post-racial generation? Is this a post-color generation that's what's pushing for this? Matter of fact, wait a minute, this is better. Who's pushing for this? Who's pushing for the unify? Is this coming from a grassroots level, or is this from a top-down initiative?
Dude, I think that's a great question on who's pushing it, because for it to be getting so much press. Like, when in American history have you seen Black Lives Matter getting so much press? That means there's a concerted effort to fund the coverage. And so I'm trying to look at it and say, well, who has some skin in the game? Who would benefit by a discussion, or who would benefit from a discussion on increased tolerance and inclusion? I believe that a lot of the push for this topic to be in media, to be engaged by many, I think is being pushed by the LGBTQ community. I think that they are the community that stands to gain the most from a conversation of tolerance being raised to a hypersensitive level in the United States of America. And I wouldn't even fault them for wanting to push that discussion by supporting it with dollars and also getting it out into the media outlets, because I do believe a lot of their scholarship is based on Black suffrage and the scholarship that came from the Civil Rights Movement and also the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay, all right. So now, wait. So what I'm getting from you, Polite, is that you're saying that this agenda within, it's not from the LBGTQ community in the Adventist Church, but just from society on a whole.
Yeah, I'm talking about from the standpoint of CNBC, CNN, the different pundits, bloggers, etc. I really believe that there's someone who has to push all of that media attention. There's some dollars that have to back that. Just like the Civil Rights Movement was pushed predominantly and primarily by Jews during the 50s and the 60s. They funded a lot of what was being pushed. There has to be a group that backs it, and I think the group that stands to benefit the most from a new discussion on tolerance and a sensitivity to the needs of marginalized groups would be the LGBTQ community.
So do you think that because that's being pushed in society has trickled down into the Adventist Church, or do you believe that there's a separate push in the Adventist Church right now?
I think the push in the Adventist Church, I think, has more to do with economics than it does.
I do too. I agree.
The point that I made. But from a societal standpoint, I definitely think that there is a group that's pushing that increased tolerance agenda.
Because LBGTQ is now taking on the mantra of being the new civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And, you know, they are being as oppressed and marginalized as the minorities in America. And yet still, but inside the church, that there is still a group that is pushing this unification, and you all feel like it's coming from an economic background or economic standpoint, that somebody's losing dollars, and because they're losing dollars, we need to find out who's got the dollars, and we got to join hands with those that got the dollars. Michael Kelly, good to have you. Glad you could jump in. We're just basically talking about where is the push coming from with this unification of the conferences? Is it a grassroots movement? Is it coming from youth and young adults on the floor, or is this a top-down movement that's trying to make it seem as if it's coming from a grassroots level?
It's definitely not, from my experience, grassroots. I was just recently at Andrews, and after I spoke on Friday night, we did an open question and answer section, and there were some people, not all, who were very ignorant to the way black conferences, white conferences were actually speaking. Even within my young people here out in California, you know, they don't know that, oh, there's black conferences. You know, what is that? You know, what does that mean? So I really don't think there's not this push from our young people. All they know really is their local church, to be quite honest with you, and they know their local church is black. But as far as like camp meeting, they know there's a bunch of black churches that get together, but they had no idea that there's a retirement plan. They had no idea about these kinds of things. So definitely from the top down.
Definitely from the top down. Corey, did you want to keep moving?
Yeah. I don't know if it necessarily, and this is my thoughts, I don't know if it necessarily even just comes from a top down or a generational thing, but I think that there has always been I'll just say it, a white fear unapologetic liberation, power, and control. Had a conversation with some friends, and they were like, you know, they had a day on Twitter, and it was called the Blackout Day, where black people all over Twitter, Tumblr, are just posting selfies, and enjoying and embracing their skin complexions and the makeup of their faces and just who we are as people. And I had some friends who said, you know, they said, I don't see color. And they said, I choose not to see color because seeing color is divisive. And if blacks are affirming themselves in that way, then that will naturally lead to reverse racism.
Okay.
Because celebrating who you are, appreciating who you are, and owning an ownership will always lead to reverse racism. And I think that there's an idea within, I believe that within whiteness that thinks that black power will lead to reverse racism or that black ownership, there's a fear of it. And I think there's an underlying fear of conferences that are self-sustained, self-run, that are economically doing well, and that are thriving. And so I think that is an underlying fear of black excellence. And I think that fear drives a lot of the language about joining together.
Yeah, I'm getting this feeling that this whole discussion about the unification of conferences, that the spotlight has been shined down upon regional conferences, that it's only the black conferences that are speaking up. I'm not hearing, I mean, I don't know if they are or if they have state conferences. We'll use that instead of white. State conferences talking about this issue as much as we are talking about this issue. And it just feels like, and I don't know if you all get the feeling as well, does it feel like it's like a push for regional conferences to shut down and then just join state conferences? I'm not hearing state conferences join regional conferences. It's like, you blacks, get rid of that, come over with us. Is that the feeling? Is that the feeling of any of you on this panel right now?
That's what any conversations I've had about that with different people, the conversation has always leaned towards the dissolution of the regional conference, to go over to the state. Like, these are some of the comments. Things are different now, almost like you can come home. And that to me, and I don't know if we're necessarily into solutions yet, but that to me is extremely inappropriate, because if we're saying that there is an issue with state and regional conferences, particularly with the remnant church, if we're saying that, and I'm not necessarily completely saying that, I know we'll get to that a little later, it's not a matter of dissolving one and joining the other, particularly if the creation of one was because of the state conference's stance on blacks being able to worship in the same buildings. African Americans and Black Americans, we didn't decide that, hey, let's just come up with a regional conference. It was birthed out of a necessity, and the necessity actually was to be able to worship and get the gospel moving forward. So if there's any talk about dissolution, it should never be a state or a regional going to one or the other. You need to blow the entire thing up and start from scratch and see what God has to lead us from there.
Well, I want to add.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
I think it goes back to what Polite was actually saying as it relates to society. Who stands to gain the most from us coming together? I think that question has to be asked as a reason for why it's getting such a push right now. And also, I think that if we answer that question, we can see why it's that the regional conferences would dissolve and come over, or whatever the case may be. But I think you have to stop and ask yourself who stands the most to gain. And I suggest that it's not the regional conferences.
Okay, Mike, go ahead. Polite.
So I want to ask Kelly something. Mike, I'm kind of feeling a little bit like the regional conferences have a superior model. If we were to break everything down and try to rebuild it from the bottom up, I think we'd land somewhere where regional conferences are. Right now here, where Lake Region Conference is, Lake Region has this territory where they administrate multiple states. The state conferences within Lake Region's territory, they have 4 different conference offices with 4 different campgrounds, with 4 different presidents. And what I'm looking at is just administratively, it seems as if the regional work has a superior model when it comes to the usage of funds and making sure that a conference is not just over a state territory, but a conference would be over a large conglomeration of states, and then they can consolidate a lot of their funds.
And let's not get into retirement. I'm sorry, I can throw that in.
Yeah, so why wouldn't they just come over to the regional side? Because I think it has a superior administrative model.
Well, I'll tell you why, and if I could respond. I think it's a great question. It's actually going to, I don't want to take us too far off, but let me tell you one of the issues why I say start all over again. Because that's actually a problem for a pastor to have a regional conference cover multiple states, and I'll tell you why. Because what happens for me, Michael Kelly, I was in Central States prior to coming to California. And so what happens with Michael is I'm first pastoring in Colorado Springs. When they move me to another district, I now get moved not to Denver, not to the church around the corner of Colorado Springs, but now I'm sent to Lincoln, Nebraska. And so when I can go from them, Nebraska, I can go to St. Louis. And let me tell you the thing that happens. In the middle of those moves, it's all good. But by the time I get ready to retire, I don't have a house that has equity. Because, see, I've had to have a house in 3 and 4 and 5 different places. And then when you add the retirement plan to that, and what happens with me, I can't live off that and still have to be able to pay rent. And so one of the unique things, for example, which is why I say there's a way to start all over, to do that in California, I could get moved to 5 or 7 different churches and still keep one location. So that's why I say blow it up and start over with all people at the table, because I even think the regional model has a little flaw in the long term. Now I'm talking long term. And that's why I would say start from scratch, but everybody's got to be at the table.
Yeah. Okay, so now kind of jumping off of that, if we start from scratch, we blow it up. All right, for example, Corey's got, let's just say hypothetically, Corey's got $1 million and I've got $5 million. And I'm coming to sit down at the table and we're saying we're starting from scratch. Who's going to get, how do we separate the funds or connect the funds? Because I'm saying, look, I'm bringing most of the money to the table. Therefore, I feel like I should have more input in regards to how this structure should be developed. And so I don't know if these questions have been asked already, but I'm sure that's going to come up, because if what Polite is saying is that the regional conferences have a stronger structure, have more money, have more members, then logically it should be state conferences should be joining the structure of regional conferences and working in a way to make it go to have the best and the biggest impact. But I understand what you're saying too, Kelly and Corey. I think you're on the same page with Kelly that all conferences need to dissolve, put all the money in one bank. But I still believe that if you do that, there's still going to be somebody going to rise up, because they're going to be like, yo, that's $5 million worth of my investment versus your $1 million investment. I have more shares. I got more shares in this company than you do. So how is it that you get the seat of power? And I'm gonna go somewhere, but you guys can sound off on that, because I'm gonna take it to a next place.
And I think that even like in talking about the blowing up and rebuilding, for me it's not just structure or funds, but it's rebuilding based upon refreshed principles and values. And I think that those need to be assessed. I think that if we don't deal with the principles and the values that come along with coming together, with these values, it'll just be for show and it'll just be for structure. And I think that if we're really talking about coming together for true unity, it needs to be shown in how we deal with each other, how we view each other, how we relate with each other, how we determine what is Adventist and what's not Adventist, or what we do and what we don't do. And I think that what we need to do is rebuild again based upon a new idea of values and principles. And I think that those conversations need to be had and alongside just economic and structural conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's ideal. I think that's ideal, but I think we're not dealing with a very real mentality that you see not only in our church but also in society. You know, this issue of like, and I want to say this very meek and mildly, just of white privilege, or whatever the case may be. I think ideally I agree with you guys, but at the end of the day, even if we blew it all up, I don't see that working. I mean, unless, and God can do anything. Let me just put that out there. He can do anything, but it would take some seriously converted people sitting at the table from all sides.
So this is
unless a holistic reframing and restructuring of philosophies and ideologies and principles and values. I agree with Rebecca. It looks good, but I agree, it's not realistic. It's
not realistic.
Yo, I'm listening to this conversation. I'm like, yo, am I in a different country? Am I in the United States of America? I mean, come on. Are you serious? When it comes to socioeconomics, when it comes to racial identities, when it comes to all of this, cannot be reframed by us sitting at a table thinking that Seventh-day Adventism is supposedly, I will call it, immune to the society and to the country that birthed it. This is an American institution. And at the end of the day, that American institution is going to have some American vibes and some innately American psychologies that it has to overcome. And I know we're waiting on the baptism of the Holy Spirit to heal the whole thing, but I'm just kind of like, man, that has not happened. It is obvious to us that it's not happened. So why are we, it's almost like, and I also disagree with the assumption that sitting around the table to reframe a structure based on new values is going to impact the local level of the church. At the end of the day, the church comes together because members get together, and the conference structure has nothing to do with that, as Mike Kelly can attest about the California conference.
So what you're saying, Polite, is regardless of the fact that we come together in the name of unity, there's still going to be black churches, still going to be white churches, still going to be Asian churches, still going to be whatever hue or whatever ethnicity you are from, because people are naturally attracted to what they look like and the style of worship that they have. And so what I'm hearing,
but that's what but I don't think that's the thing. See, I think we're saying come together and break it down under the idea of unity. We are unified. We're just not uniform. So let's not get that it all twisted. We're all under the banner of Christian Seventh-day Adventism. It looks differently in a regional conference in the way it's expressed in most of those churches' worship, but not always, than it might in a state conference. What I think the question really needs to be when it comes to this idea of regional versus state and this idea of sitting around the table is we have to ask ourselves the original question when we formed conferences, period, and then formed regional state. Is the current structure of the regional and the state the best way to get the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church moving forward?
Exactly, and I think that's the key point. I think that at the end of the day, the white and black issue is not the primary issue. The primary issue, I think, is economics, and then I think what we need to I guess figure out is if coming together is beneficial economically for the furtherance of the mission. That's it. That needs to be the discussion, not the white and black issue.
Well, no, but and that's what I'm saying. Whether it's money, whatever it may be, the bottom line is your structure is only there for one reason: to better fulfill your mission. You create a structure that helps you fulfill your mission. So in a basketball team, Phil Jackson has a mission when he was with the Lakers. The mission is win the championship. What is his structure to do that? The triangle offense. Now, what's happened with Phil Jackson now in New York is he's found out that that structure is not going to help him fulfill that mission. And so what is he been talking about doing now? Starting all over and build a different structure. So that really needs to be the question. And that's why I don't mind if I got 5 million and you got 1 million, because supposedly we all should have the same mission. And that mission should be to move the gospel forward. So if my 5 million helps us get a new structure to move it forward, no problem. But to me, that's where it really is. And if we want to continue to make it a race issue, which I know it has racial components, but for me, it's not
But components, it's not the main. It shouldn't be the main argument. It is economically, is it beneficial for us to come together to further the mission?
Whoa, time out. Man, I'm just appalled at this conversation right now. It is as if we have just taken Carter G. Woodson's book and thrown it in the fire and just disrespected it. Did not my man say all the way back in 1903 that for us to better understand the present defects, they must be analyzed against the backdrop of their historical context? So the historical context of our separation of conferences is what? Racism. So we can't turn around in 2015 and act like, no, it's all about economics now. No, it's not about economics. The thing that created the structure that we have now is racism. For us to conclude that the issue has changed, we would have to assess society and ask the question, within Adventism and without, is racism still a major issue within our church and without our church? We would all say, yes, it is. Therefore, that is how we assess our structure and the needs of it, but we can't disregard the past that created it as if it's no longer relevant.
I don't think the word is disregard. I think it's not the primary. I don't think it should be the primary issue, because at the end of the day, even if we address it, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
I just can.
So my thing is, I'm not, disregard is not the word. I'm saying that it shouldn't be the primary. I think it needs to be addressed, but it shouldn't be the primary focus, because at the end of the day, as we've all said and as we all believe, that if we still dissolved some conferences or blew it up or whatever the case may be, that there would still be black churches, there would still be white churches, there would still be Asian churches. That's not the that's not the word. I'm using. I'm saying that it shouldn't be the primary. What's going to advance our mission?
And I think Mike, and Jamie, tell me if you're feeling this from this standpoint. I don't think that the reason that we should no longer have a regional or state conference should be to solve the issue of racism. And see, that's what the conversation is. I'm not saying that racism is not the issue. I'm saying, it's not an issue. But don't say that we need to dissolve the regional conference or a state conference because somehow in doing that, we solve the issue of racism. No. I'm saying that conversation of dissolving, while race is a part of it, that cannot be the main reason. Because racism is there whether you dissolve it and start from the beginning or not. And that's what I'm saying. Because all I keep hearing is the race, we're a better church than that. It's 2015. Our issues aren't there anymore, blah, 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 blah. No, not at all. That thing is still going to be there. That dissolving it will not deal with the issue of racism.
So let me ask this question. In light of unifying, coming together, the theme of our show is called Justice Speaks. How does unifying, coming together, address the ills of society as it regards to social justice? Is this unification of conferences just an insular thing for a good PR, or is this a coming together because look, we want to make impact and deal with? Because my thing is, my question is this: what happens to the black work when we come together? And I'm not saying that regional conferences are doing a great job at doing black work, because I do feel like they need to have their own banks, hospitals, etc., things of that nature, which is probably another topic. But what happens to the black work? Does it get relegated to an office in the corner, and that we're just together to be unified? Or does this unification come together as a means to say, look, we're coming together because we want to put our resources together to use them outside? Or are we just coming together just because we want to come together? How does it relate to justice?
I think it's a PR move. I think it's PR. I think the big push for it is that it doesn't look good. And I'm really believing that at the root of our discussion, there's a fundamental problem. Our members actually think these upper tiers run the local church. Man, the NAD has nothing to do with my local church. Nothing.
So what you're saying is that these entities on top of us are not money generating entities. They do not generate any income, and they make it appear as if they have more power than the local church.
Very much so. If you look at South Central Conference as an example and look over the past 7 years, you will see that I'll say the variable that impacts local church growth the most was pastors on staff. That is the number one variable that just took it through the roof. Putting more people in the conference office does not impact it the same way. We see this, for example, in the Southwest Region Conference. They have the most individuals in the conference office, and many of the people there are starting to talk about, man, maybe we need to place more individuals at the local church level than we have in the conference office. Let's try it a different way to see if something really boosts our morale, our economics, our membership growth, etc., all of those things. And so this conversation, many people think once we come together as conferences, all of a sudden that will impact the local level. I say no. I don't think so. It's going to be when churches feel a burden to come together with other churches on the other side, regardless of their conference affiliation. And I think that's what starts to give an authentic example to the surrounding community.
I see what Mike's saying, because I understand that for me as a pastor at the local level, I haven't no one's quote unquote stopped me from doing anything. At the same time though, because we are sending different monies up to these conferences, there are kickbacks that we're able to get in the forms of different things from the union, different projects, and there's all different kinds of money out there. I just have to believe that if we all were more unified, that maybe there's a unification of funds for different things that we can do to help the local level. Not saying that it's controlled at top, but if we all were able to come and strategize better, maybe even when you come together these conferences, you say, you know what, we don't need those 12 churches there. We can have one big church here, and we're all going to be able to staff that better. I just think there's a lot of different things you can do with those different kinds being said at the top. Now, I've never worked at the top, but I just can't imagine that if instead of having 6 and 7 different and 8 different places and conferences, as you said, if there was maybe 1 or 2 more localized ones where they're together, there's not as much layering and hierarchy. And that's just kind of what my thought is. Not that it hinders the local level, but it might be able to support it more.
Okay, Polite and Rebecca, you guys brought up, Rebecca, you talked about economics. You mentioned that word a few times. Polite, you talked about we are in America, this society that we're in, and correct me if I'm wrong, jump in if I don't make the connection right. You're saying that our values are built on this society that we live in. I'm talking about the Adventist church. Economics, society built on the values that we're in. Is our system that we have, top, church, conference, union, division, GC, is it built on a capitalistic structure where you have the top that is riding the backs of those that are at the bottom, similar to American government society, that you need poor in order to be rich and to do the things that you need to do? So is the unification or coming together of conferences, is that the structure that you're talking about, Corey, that needs to be addressed? Are they coming together to address this issue of how resources are fairly distributed so that impact in community can happen on a local level? I know that question was packed. So, I mean, okay, so is our structure capitalistic? Is it capitalism? Is it riding off the backs of the local level? And do we need to address that issue if we're dissolving conferences? Do we need to look at ways to free up more money so that the local church can do more power? Or is this back to the same thing? Is this just a PR move, just to look good?
I think it's not capitalistic. if it was capitalistic, churches would be able to keep their own tithe. They wouldn't shit it up. That's more of a socialistic model. But from the standpoint, there a lot of people will talk about the reason we should come together is based on John 17. Jesus prays for his disciples and says, "Man, Father, may they be one as we are one." And then we see this push by the disciples in the early church to see everyone come together, from not only Jews with Jews and Gentiles with Gentiles, but also Jews with Gentiles. So there seems to be this push for people to come together. I think what we face in North America, especially, I received a tweet by someone while we've been talking that said they're saying, guys, but what about the gospel? Doesn't the gospel supersede these issues in America, social issues? And my response to that is, well, my brother, the same gospel that you say supersedes all this is the same gospel that was used to establish it. That the racial hierarchical structure was something that the gospel, the Bible that we use, was used to establish and institute. It was up to the slaves to teach themselves first how to read, because it was illegal to read, but secondly, reteach themselves the Bible, for them to develop a new theology about what God is trying to accomplish. So a lot of people want to proof text their way to a solution, not recognizing that the same book they're using to try to push for unity was the same book that was used to push for separation.
Which goes to show that there has to be a different agenda. There's always there's an agenda behind even pushing the gospel.
And I agree, and even taking it a step further, which is why I keep bringing up just reshaping how we think, is because we have to deal with being at the table of how that gospel is interpreted, or how that gospel is used, or how it's thought about. I think that the thing with our structure, that it may come up and agitate the feelings of black people on liberation, because JB, what you described is not a liberating. From what you described, is not a liberating idea. It's not a liberating structure. And so I think that there is something that agitates black people in America with the structure, with the idea of being liberated, with the idea of being free, with the idea of being autonomous, with the idea, and I think that teaches, as Michael Polite said, our people to feel like the NAD controls their church, or the GC controls their church. This institution they never see, they never hear about, they never hear from, they don't know who's there, but it's just this great thing that's 2 steps or 3 steps higher than them that controls what they actually own.
Yeah, I'm hearing that, because when I talk to most members, they really don't know where the GC is or what it is, or who the NAD president is. I think that's more like us who are inside or behind the door. So them coming together, or say the conference is coming together, I don't really know how it's going to impact the local church. I don't really see what it's going to do, or what was the intent or the purpose that I really, and I think that's like my core issue, or what I'm trying to get to. What is the purpose of doing it? Because like you were saying, Kelly, when you were talking about, your young people, they're like, what is that? I don't even know what it is. If they come together, it's just going to be the same office. Is it going to be the same office that's there? Is there anything that's going to change about them? Any new difference that's going to impact the local church? Because I still feel like there's still going to be, I mean, if the reason for coming together is to unify, there's still going to be black and white churches.
There is going to be. And let me say this, brother moderator, brother chair,
Yes.
that at the end of the day, there are 4,000 pastors in the field, 1,000 in the offices. If we merge and come together, that 1,000 will probably jump to 2,000. And at the end of the day, still just doing nothing but pulling more resources from the local church. It's going to impact the local church negatively. I mean, as so many resources are already being pulled from the local church. And as you say, I just don't see how it would benefit, and that's Polite pointed out earlier, the local church.
But there's a way it could, and I don't know what that way is. But again, one of the reasons that we haven't gone back is Ellen White says until the Lord shows us a better way. Why? Because the idea is we don't want anything to hinder the gospel going forward. And so my thing is, if coming together, if we can somehow see how that will help us move the gospel forward, then it is incumbent upon us to look at something like that. But again, to do it just for the sake of doing it, for the sake of unity, for the sake of finances, that doesn't make sense. We have to be able to say, okay, if we do this, this is how it helps us do what we are supposed to be doing. If it doesn't do that, you leave it alone.
And everybody needs a voice at the table, because what Mike was saying, polite, is the gospel to me, from my African American experience, the same as the gospel from a white American experience.
James Cone
go ahead, Corey.
James Cone would say no, and I've read him, and he said the God, or the way that we view the way that slaves view the God under the docks, it's not the same way that they view the slave masters view God. There are two different gods that they're looking at, and so the question is, whose theology are you listening to? Whose theology, whose perspective?
So when I come sit at the table and I'm sitting there across, I'm going to say, look, from what I understand, the gospel is liberation. It was Jesus' inaugural speech in Luke 4 to set the captives free, to heal the brokenhearted. That is the gospel. That is the mission of the church. But to somebody else, that mission might be interpreted differently, to say, oh, Jesus is just speaking on a spiritual level. He's talking about spiritual oppression, not actual oppression as far as a society that judges your education by your zip code and what kind of wealth is distributed. So that really needs to be addressed, because what will we do if we unify and we come together and we're going to talk about the mission for the church? Is the overall mission of the church the same as the state conferences and the regional conferences? Do we have the same mission?
But I think that's what one of the things that Dr. King and a lot of these guys were fighting for. It wasn't just so we can sit down and use the bathroom, and sit at the same restaurants, but it was for a seat at the table so that other people could understand the plight of African Americans and blacks. And so in my mind, do state conferences see the mission the same as regional conferences? I don't think so, because you see it from your own experience, just like I don't see it from their experience. But if I'm at the table with you now, and we now have to build something new together, you have to listen to my experience, and I have to listen to yours. But if I'm never at the table, then that's what's different. Then you won't be able to do that. So I hear that it is different, but being at the table is why I'm able to hear that from you.
I don't know. I feel like ideally, of course, the gospel, I mean, we've been changed by the gospel. I've been changed. I know I've been changed by the gospel, and we know that the gospel works. But I'm just thinking about, Barack Obama right now. And he has the biggest seat at the table. And he is having the hardest time with some of the counterparts, because he has a seat at the table, and they don't want him to have a seat at the table. And my thing is that it would take the most converted people at the table, and in order for anything to be different. I mean, even the gospel has been pushed with an agenda. And so I guess I'm being a realist, as opposed to, again, I believe that the blood covers the gospel. I mean, again, I've been changed by it. And so, but I still think that it would take just the most converted people.
You can't say but. You can't say but. Because
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
not but, however.
My opinion is, I think the stronger move would be for local churches to come together. No movement has ever started from the top. Every change in society has always come from a grassroots level, and it's always been from the bottom that has just flipped everything that the top is trying to do. So I think that the motive should be to get local pastors to sit together at a table with regional churches and state churches and talking about a unified mission versus the conferences coming together, because I think that's where the power is. I think the power is on the grassroots level. I think the power is in those students at Andrews University. The power is in those pews, that we continue to perpetuate or give off this idea that they have to wait for the top to do something in order to see a change. And it's the same thing in society, that we have to wait for the government to change their laws so that we can start seeing change down here. But everything that I know is always started from the top, getting together and said, yo, we're going to flip this thing and we're going to move this thing the way it should be. I don't know if any of you agree with that statement. You can sound off on how you feel what will be the best way.
I agree.
Can you hear me?
I think, yeah. I was saying I agree. I think, what'd you say?
I was just saying, go ahead, man.
Oh, okay. I agree. I think that also, from what I've observed, that if it's on the local level and it's going to take place on the local level, that we have to, I think, in our church, do a better job of affirming blackness. I think that with language that we use, and sometimes culturally, blackness or things that are specific to black culture is seen as appeased or allowed instead of affirmed and celebrated. Seen as less than, but not seen as okay and affirmed by God, almost as if God is winking at our ignorance. And I think that on the local level, I think that that's one part that needs to be dealt with, so that, and that's why I go back to rethinking and reframing and building based upon new philosophies and new principles, so that when people are coming together, it's not we're allowing for you all to do this. Like, for instance, having drums this one Sabbath to appease you, but saying that we are really going to reframe and incorporate everything together so that everybody feels affirmed. And that's my issue. Not appeased and not allowed, but affirmed and celebrated. Well, I think that when we can deal with that will help a lot.
Mm-hmm. I'll say this, in response to your question, Jamie, I think it's actually easier to merge the conferences than the churches.
Yeah.
Kind of, he's alluding to it. I mean, people's theology for worship, people's understanding of what you should dress. I mean, it's so segregated in churches to this extent. I know the conversation started with the conference, but I don't think you can have a talk about the conference at the local churches. Let me tell you this: if a black American has a problem within a black church, and they, let's say, transfer over to a white church, and there's a lot of them that start transferring over, we've seen what happens. Unfortunately, that white church, everybody goes. And that happened at CPC. But check this out. You get an African to transfer to a white church. They don't leave. Yeah. And the reason why is not because of the color of their skin, but because of the way that they approach worship, the way that they approach all those things. So that unification would be crazy. And see, that's where we really have an issue. Yeah. Because when you translate what happens at the local level to what's going to happen in heaven, we're in a serious amount of trouble. And maybe it's perpetuated by the conferences being separate. But if we want to talk about all the powers on a local level, boy, that's that to me is where the work would be. Yeah. That's where the gospel really come in, not administratively, but to really get people to understand a broader spectrum of what church really is.
And to me, it's still an internal focus. It's like, at the end of the day, where's the mission? How important is the mission? What are we doing to reach people?
Yeah, and I'm with you. And I really believe that, we're getting ready to wrap up, and the mission is so important. I think that we need to define what our mission is holistically, together as Adventists. What are we here for? What do we do? Is it just to do programs and invite each other to our local congregations to perform in a theater? Sabbath morning show. Isaiah chapter 1 talks about how God does not hear our prayers because I'm tired of your Sabbaths. I'm tired of your fast. I'm tired of your weekly meeting gatherings. He says if you would learn to help the oppressed and seek justice, then I will begin to listen to you. So if the shutting down of conferences is just for PR purposes, to say that we're united, it's meaningless for me because it won't affect the local church. And as long as there are blacks, whites, Asians, Latinos, Indians, etc. on this earth, there will always be those types of churches that are separated. But if we're shutting down to produce a shift in culture, if we're coming together to say, look, we're going to shift the culture, shift the system, shift the society, then I'm all in it. I'm all for it. I'm going to go with it. But until we address the issue of economics, the issue of who holds seats of power, the issues of who controls what goes the other way or how this goes, then it's meaningless. Because as long as we come together, the girls in California are still going to be trafficked and sold as sex slaves and to be in truck stops being used. Until if we get together, black boys are still going to be getting shot. Black men are still going to be going to prisons. White girls still going to be slitting their wrists. All these problems are going to be happening in our society as we get together in our finest garb from Sabbath to Sabbath, jump and holler as high as we can, but we don't know how straight we're supposed to walk. And so if coming together doesn't mean that we're going to address those things, then at the end of the day, look, I don't got nothing to do with it. I'm just going to keep on fighting on the road for justice. And so we need to really ask ourselves the question, can the gospel that we preach really change and impact lives? And how far are we willing to go to break up our system of what we've had for so long so that we can include those that are outside of the building, or just break down the buildings and just have an outside community church and be really out there sending out voices to the voiceless. So, you know, this conversation to me seems like it's very insular about the shutting down of conferences, but I think it can be meaningful and impactful if we come together at the table with those agendas at hand. And the agenda has to be, how do we reach the least of these? Because when I read the scriptures, Jesus says in Matthew, he says, you know, naked and you didn't clothe me, hungry, you didn't feed me, I was in prison and you didn't visit me. And then he says, depart from me, I know thee not. He doesn't say depart from me because you didn't know the 2300-day prophecy, because you didn't know how to memorize scripture. He says, you didn't do these things to the least of these, and you have also done it to me. And then he condemns them to hell. And so if we want to keep on having our shuck and jive show and do what we want to do, then look, man, we ain't doing nothing.
But, you know, Jamie, even with that being said, I think sometimes the problem, even also with this conversation, which we have to even broaden it a little more, is while most of the membership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not in the United States, most of it is funded from the United States. And so when you start to mess with those things, you're messing with the entire church. I also had a conversation with somebody who was very interested. They said, you know, we do justice when we go to these other places, which is very interesting. You know, we'll send missionaries over to Africa, you know, to do all different things and deal with some of those issues. One of the reasons I don't mind, of course, going to those places to preach is I feel that America is a mission field. But I think what you're speaking of as well, you know, if we're going to break everything down, you'd have to reestablish your mission. And I think this is why I love this show, because what we're saying here on the show is our mission goes beyond simply stating Babylon is fallen, is fallen. You know, we want to help the people who are in Babylon, not just theologically, but socially and economically. And that's what the call is. And unfortunately, because of the divide in our structure, in our culture, it affects a divide in our theology, which of course affects the way that we activate and the way we run our churches and those kinds of things. So,
yeah. Mike, you bounced off for a second. You want to jump in. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, man. I just want to, at the end of the show, I think it would be very appropriate to state my bias. My bias probably can be best described by looking at the story of Joseph when his abusers return back to his life. When his abusers are right there before him actually wanting friendship and brotherhood versus to throw him in a pit. And I think the reason why Joseph pauses before he takes off the headdress and kind of reveals himself as he does at the end of the story is he's trying to see if there's been true heart change. He's trying to see, are you guys just acting the part because you want a piece of Egypt's resources? Or are you guys truly different men? Are you changed men? And I think a lot of times we make it sound like forgiveness and reconciliation are the same step. when in actuality, I think they show up on different ends of the spectrum. One could even argue that forgiveness is the starting line and reconciliation is the finish line. I definitely see that God forgave us in Romans chapter 5. But true reconciliation doesn't happen until Romans chapter 8. What happens in between the two? Romans chapter 7, where Paul says, I'm a wretched dude. Man, I've done some terrible things. And I think that's what I'm waiting for. You know, when I talk about Adventism being an American institution, what I'm really saying is I'm suspicious of any talk of unity, because my American history seems to suggest that as soon as a minority group gains economic viability and even starts to outperform the majority entity trying to do the same thing, that majority will always come over and say, hey, we need to change, we need to restructure, we really need to chase after the heart of God. And I'm just like, yo, like Joseph, I'm going to test you. I'm going to sit back and watch you and how you adjust and react to certain things in your environment. And then when I see the fruit of a heart change, then I will open myself up, make myself vulnerable and say, yo, I am Joseph, the brother that you tried to do away with, but what you meant for evil, God meant for my good.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Rebecca, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say I can receive that that was good, sir.
I agree with that on a very fundamental level. Yeah. I think that's where the difference between us and hopefully the difference between us would be that the Holy Spirit in the gospel of Jesus is able to do something different in that than if we were in a business making all the money and doing that. And that's the goal and the hope, which hopefully would be different. But at the same day, we're still dealing with flawed human beings that we have issues.
Yeah.
And again, I just think that's a part. I think that's still just a part. As we're fulfilling our mission, that we're sitting back watching, you know. But
yeah, and I agree with all of you, and I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate all the viewers. And I agree that if we come to the table, then there needs to be some heartfelt, open confession and a realization of what was done to, you know, blacks in America and black Adventists, and that we never wanted to start our own regional conferences, but yet we were told to go and do it. And even Ellen White gave us a sanction to go forth. But now that if it's coming from a state conference leader or parishioner or whatever saying that we need to dissolve and come together, then it sends alarms and chills up the spines of those that said originally we never wanted to have our own thing. And so now that, you know, it's coming down to this, and I think blacks have always been individuals who are willing to accept and to receive anyone that is in the struggle with us, because we never see black as a color, we see it as an experience. And that's why when you saw the movie Selma, we had the white priest and the other white lady and people of all ethnicities marching with us. It never said, you know, you can't join us. And so we've always been a people of reconciliation and acceptance. But I believe that we need to get to the place where everyone is honest at the table and a true education comes forth out of this so that everybody can be informed and not misinformed. And then we can move forward if there's a healing process. And so I would love to see that healing process take place. We're not anti-white, we're not anti-black, we're not anti-Asian, we're anti-exploitation and oppression on all levels. And so I think the mission of Jesus Christ was that. He did more work outside the church than inside the church. And he did his work because he wanted to give a voice to the voiceless, give hope to the hopeless, and to somehow reinstate people to be who they are and what God intended them to be. And so that's our goal and our purpose in coming together, then I'm all for it. Let's go ahead and let's do it. But if not, then I'm going to do it on the local level the best that I can and learn to sacrifice my desires and waive my rights so that others can have an opportunity to have a piece of the pie. And so I want to thank everybody for watching. I got a good question here, and I think on our next episode, we want to talk about how can your voice be heard, how to get your voice heard. And someone asked this question that we could think about, and I want the viewers to think about it as well. They said, if you are a member of a church which you believe holds a prejudicial, misinformed, and inhumane sexual ethic, should you part ways with that church or continue to maintain connections in hope of reforming it? What do you think? So I think that's a good question. I actually want to talk about that next week, and hopefully that we could tackle it. So I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank everybody for viewing. We have spent our hour. This has been Justice Speaks, and we want you to speak up and speak out. Don't lie dormant. You could be a dreamer, but don't live in your bed. You got to get up and get out and do something. So with that being said, let's close out with the word of prayer. Father God Almighty, we thank you for your grace and mercy. And Lord, let us learn to look to ourselves and remove anything that's not in us. Let us be the man in the mirror. And God, if you are calling us to do a work that we ought to do, let us go forth and do it. And to remember that we are under your care, your watchful eye. And there's nothing that has been done on this earth, Lord, that you have not seen. And so strengthen us and encourage us and bless us, as well as those viewing. And this we pray in your name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 All right, good night, good night, good night.